It was a cold February night, the kind where the air feels sharp and every breath catches in the back of your throat. Valentine's Day was just a few hours away, and the city was buzzing with the last-minute rush of lovers, shoppers, and the familiar hum of hearts eager for romance. But for Lily the night felt anything but festive. As she hurried through the snow-dusted streets, the red and pink decorations on the storefronts felt like a distant memory. She couldn't shake the strange, unsettling feeling that had gripped her since the moment she opened the old, tattered letter. It wasn't that she wasn't used to strange things happening. After all, she had worked as a librarian at the Old Town Library for years. It was a quiet place, filled with dusty corners and books that smelled of history. But tonight something felt different. Something was waiting. It all started when Lily had found the letter hidden between the pages of an old romance novel that had been checked out for months but never returned. The book had been left on the top shelf, where it hadn't belonged. The cover was torn, the pages yellowed with age. As she flipped through, a single envelope fell out, its edges worn and fragile. The letter was old, much older than the book. It was addressed to someone named Clara, written in elegant, looping script. Lily had half expected it to be a piece of forgotten history, perhaps an old love letter lost between the pages of time. But when she read the first line, her heart skipped a beat. Clara, be careful with what you wish for this Valentine's Day. The rest of the letter was a mess of ink blots and smudges, as though someone had hastily written it, fearing something they couldn't understand. But the words were clear enough. It spoke of a love so intense, so all-consuming, that it threatened to cross the line between the living and the dead. It spoke of a curse, of spirits that roamed the earth searching for their lost loves, and of a tragedy that had struck on Valentine's Day over a century ago. Lily had immediately felt a strange pull in her chest, a connection to the name Clara, even though she had never heard of her before. It was like a thread of something ancient was wrapping around her, tugging her in a direction she wasn't ready to go. She shuddered as she walked through the streets of the city, the chill in the air clinging to her skin like a heavy coat. She had tried to ignore it, thinking the letter was simply a coincidence, a piece of forgotten history, but tonight it seemed to echo in her mind. She had to learn more. She had to understand what was happening. The bookstore, once a place of comfort for her, now felt like something more sinister. The lights flickered as she entered, the shadows of the shelves looming large in the quiet space. The door creaked as she closed it behind her, locking herself inside. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and leather, a familiar scent that usually brought her a sense of peace. But tonight, it felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in around her. Lily moved to the back of the store, her feet silent on the hardwood floor. She had to find more answers, something that could explain what was happening to her. The letter had mentioned the curse, but it didn't explain what it meant. What had happened to Clara? What had happened to the man she had loved so deeply that even death could not separate them? As she scanned the rows of books, her eyes landed on an old, worn journal tucked between the shelves. It was leather-bound, with no title or name to indicate its contents. The spine creaked as she opened it, the pages brittle under her fingertips. The writing inside was dated February 14, 1912, the same year as the letter. Lily's heart raced as she read the first few lines. Tonight I saw him. The one I have waited for all my life, the one I loved and lost. He returned on Valentine's Day, his love still burning, still reaching for me. But there was something wrong. Something in his eyes, something darker than before. I have made a terrible mistake. The journal was Clara's, and the words she had written were frantic, as though she had known the end was near. Lily turned the pages with trembling hands, piecing together the mystery. Clara had fallen in love with a man named Elias, a passionate young man who had promised her the world. They had spent countless hours together, their love growing with each passing day. But the letter and now this journal painted a darker picture. Elias had been involved in something strange, something dark that he had tried to keep hidden from Clara. He called it a ritual, Clara had written. A way to bring souls back from the other side. I should have never agreed. I should have never let him. But I loved him, and love is a dangerous thing. The more Lily read, the more she understood. Elias had tried to perform a ritual on Valentine's Day, one that had gone horribly wrong. It had been an attempt to bring Clara's dead brother back to life, but it had resulted in something far worse. Clara's love for Elias had been so pure, so deep, that she had unwittingly become a part of the curse. And now it seemed that curse had come full circle. Lily's blood ran cold as the last entry of the journal loomed before her. Read. Tonight he came to me. But it wasn't Elias. It was something else, something that wore his face but not his soul. The shadows move around me, whispering his name. And I am afraid. I am afraid that I will be next. Please, whoever reads this, heed my warning. Never, under any circumstances, wish for a love that is beyond the living. Lily slammed the journal shut, her hands trembling. She didn't know whether to be terrified or to run. The feeling of being watched, the tension in the air, was unbearable. She turned to leave, but as she reached for the door, the phone on the counter began to ring. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly approached the phone, the echo of her footsteps unnerving in the quiet store. The ringing grew louder, as though it were calling her, beckoning her to answer. She hesitated, a sense of dread creeping up her spine. And then she picked it up. "Hello," she said, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. A cold silence filled the line before a voice, low and guttural, came through the receiver. "Is your Valentine's Day haunted, Lily?" The voice was familiar but distorted. And then it spoke again. "I never should have left you, Clara." Lily's blood ran cold as she recognized the voice. It was Elias. Or rather, it was pretending to be him. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the shadows closing in on her from every angle. The voice on the phone continued, "You have opened the door, Lily. The curse is here and there is no escape." The line went dead. Lily stood motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, her fingers numb as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. Elias's voice, the voice of the man she had never known, yet somehow felt intimately familiar with, still echoed in her mind. It wasn't the voice of a living man, but something far more chilling, something that sent a wave of dread crashing over her. As the line went dead, she could feel the darkness creep around her like a cold, suffocating fog. Her heart raced in her chest, pounding as though it might burst from the pressure. The silence in the bookstore was deafening now, oppressive. Her eyes darted to the shelves, the same shelves she had spent countless hours walking past, familiar and comforting. But now they seemed to loom over her, like silent sentinels guarding something sinister. She couldn't stay here. Lily's breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she pulled the phone from her ear and set it down with trembling hands. Her thoughts were scattered, racing with terror, but one thing was clear. Whatever curse had begun with Clara and Elias was now tied to her, and there was no escaping it. She grabbed her coat from the back of the chair, moving quickly toward the door. She needed to get out, to leave this place, to put distance between herself and the cursed books that seemed to draw her in. As she stepped outside, the chill of the night air hit her like a slap to the face, but it wasn't enough to clear the fog in her mind. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual bustle of the city subdued by the falling snow. The flakes drifted down lazily like tiny ghosts, covering everything in a thick blanket of white. But as she walked down the sidewalk, the silence began to weigh on her, suffocating her with each step. There was no sound, no life, only the crunch of her boots against the snow and the hollow feeling that seemed to settle deeper into her chest. And then she heard it. A whisper, faint at first, like a breath of wind through the trees. It carried through the streets, echoing around her, sending shivers down her spine. "Lily?" She froze. The voice. Her name. It was Elias's voice. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the sound, her breath catching in her throat. The street seemed to shift around her, the world blurring as she looked around, trying to find where the voice had come from. "Lily?" It was closer now. Closer. The voice whispered from the darkness, but she couldn't see anyone. The world around her was still, except for the faint glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the snow-covered ground. Her legs felt heavy, her feet frozen in place, but she forced herself to move. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but the voice was pulling her in. It was as if it were calling her, beckoning her to come closer. The fog was thicker now, swirling in the streets like a living thing, and with each step, the world became more distorted, more dreamlike. The air grew colder, and Lily could see her breath hanging in the air in front of her, like a pale cloud. It wasn't just the cold. It was something deeper, something unnatural. The voice was louder now, echoing around her, swirling in the fog. "Don't you want to be with me again, Lily?" Her blood ran cold. She had to stop. She couldn't keep going. This wasn't right. She had to break free from whatever this was, from whatever dark force had taken hold of her. But then she saw it. A figure standing at the end of the street, shrouded in mist, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlight. The figure was tall, with a silhouette that seemed too perfect, too still. And though she couldn't make out the face, Lily knew without a doubt who it was. Elias. Or at least what had become of him. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up, and she started toward him, her heart pounding louder in her ears with each step. She didn't know why, but she had to see him. She had to know what had happened. As she drew closer, the figure seemed to grow more distinct. The fog parted around it, like a curtain being pulled back, revealing something she couldn't fully comprehend. The closer she got, the more she felt a sense of dread building inside her. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't turn away now. The figure shifted, stepping forward as though it had been waiting for her to reach it. And as it moved, the air around her grew thicker, heavier. Her chest tightened, and for the first time she realized that the figure wasn't just standing there. It was beckoning her. "Come closer, Lily," the voice whispered again, soft and pleading. Her pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. This wasn't the Elias she had read about in the letter or the journal. This was something else. Something that wasn't human. But she couldn't turn back now. The pull was too strong, too overwhelming. She took another step forward, her legs trembling, her mind screaming at her to run, but her body betrayed her. And then it spoke again, its voice darker now, its tone not just Elias's, but something far colder, far more ancient. "You've opened the door, Lily. And now you belong to me." The figure stepped forward again, its form twisting and shifting in the fog, like a shadow being stretched across time. And as it reached out for her, Lily realized with a sickening clarity that it wasn't Elias at all. It was something far worse, something that had been waiting for the right moment to claim her. In that instant she understood the curse. She understood what had happened to Clara, to Elias, and to herself. She was no longer just a witness to the story. She was part of it. The love, the tragedy, the curse, they were all tied to her now. The figure's hand reached out, cold and insubstantial, like a wisp of smoke. But as it touched her skin, something jolted through her, a shock that made her freeze in place, her heart stopping. And then the darkness swallowed her whole.